Trump just had a total meltdown, and it's all because Canada outplayed him in his own trade war. He thought slapping tariffs on Canada would make him look strong, but instead it backfired massively. Trudeau didn't just hit back, he crushed Trump's strategy, targeting key US industries and turning his own supporters against him. And when Trump realized his plan was failing, he lost it. His usual allies distanced themselves, US businesses took billion-dollar losses, and the world watched as Canada turned this trade war into Trump's biggest humiliation yet. Let's break it all down. What's happening? At first glance, the tariff decision seemed to be about trade imbalances. Trump has long claimed that the United States was being ripped off in trade deals, particularly by allies like Canada. However, the economic data told a different story. Canada was the United States' largest export market, and trade between the two nations had always been fairly balanced. So if it wasn't purely economic, what else was driving Trump's sudden attack on Canada? The answer lies in political motivations, economic frustrations, and personal grudges. Politically, Trump was facing mounting pressure at home. With an election looming, his support among key voter bases, especially blue-collar workers in the manufacturing and energy sectors, was slipping. By imposing tariffs on Canadian goods, he could frame himself as a defender of American jobs, even if the move risked damaging businesses on both sides of the border. Economically, Trump's administration was struggling to contain rising inflation and concerns over energy dependence. Instead of addressing structural issues within the U.S. economy, Trump chose to blame Canada for America's energy challenges. His claim that Canada was unfairly benefiting from trade agreements became a rallying cry for protectionist policies. And then there was the personal element. Trump's relationship with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had always been tense. Trudeau's firm, measured leadership stood in stark contrast to Trump's erratic behavior. The two had clashed in public before, and Trump never forgets a slight. His latest move wasn't just about trade, it was personal. As the tariffs were announced, Canada had a choice: give in to Trump's pressure or fight back. What happened next stunned Washington. Canada was blindsided by the tariffs, but it wasted no time in responding. Instead of backing down, Trudeau made a move that Trump never saw coming: Canada's bold counterattack. In the past, when faced with aggressive U.S. trade policies, Canada had often opted for quiet diplomacy. This time was different. Instead of taking a defensive stance, Trudeau and his government launched an immediate counteroffensive. Within hours of Trump's tariff announcement, Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs of its own, targeting a carefully selected list of American products. These weren't just any goods, they were chosen specifically to maximize political and economic pain in the United States. The tariffs hit key industries in Trump's support base, including steel, aluminum, and agricultural products. Wisconsin cheese, Kentucky bourbon, and Florida orange juice, all major exports from states that helped elect Trump, were suddenly significantly more expensive in Canada. The move was designed to send a clear message. If Trump wanted a trade war, Canada was ready to fight back where it hurt the most. But Canada didn't stop at tariffs. Trudeau immediately mobilized international allies, warning that Trump's actions weren't just a threat to Canada, but to global trade stability. Canadian diplomats reached out to European, Asian, and Latin American markets, accelerating trade diversification plans that had already been in motion. The comprehensive economic and trade agreement with Europe and expanded trade partnerships with Asia meant that Canada had other options, something the United States hadn't accounted for. Trump, who had assumed that Canada would simply accept the tariffs, was caught off guard. Instead of forcing Trudeau to the negotiating table, his aggressive stance had rallied Canadians against him. Political parties across Canada, including even some of Trudeau's fiercest critics, stood united in opposition to Trump's tariffs. Public support for retaliatory action skyrocketed. Suddenly, what Trump had assumed would be a one-sided power move had turned into a full-blown economic fight, one that could have serious consequences for American businesses. The economic battle was escalating, but Canadians weren't just waiting for their government to act. They were taking matters into their own hands. The boycott that could cripple the U.S. Canadian citizens responded to Trump's tariffs with a level of national unity rarely seen before. People weren't just upset, they were angry, and they were ready to hit back in their own way. Almost overnight, a grassroots boycott of American products and travel began to spread across Canada. Social media was flooded with calls for Canadians to shop local, avoid U.S. brands, and cancel trips to the United States. Within days, businesses and consumers alike were reconsidering their spending habits. The numbers were staggering. A survey conducted shortly after the tariffs were announced found that over 80% of Canadians planned to reduce or completely stop purchasing American goods. Major retailers and grocery chains reported a sharp decline in sales of US-made products, as customers actively sought out Canadian alternatives. The travel industry was another major casualty. Canada sends millions of tourists to the United States every year, contributing billions of dollars to the US economy. As the boycott took hold, hotel bookings, airline ticket sales, and cross-border shopping trips plummeted. Some estimates suggested that the Canadian travel boycott alone could cost the US economy more than $2 billion in lost revenue. But while American companies struggled, Canada was thriving. The boycott led to a surge in domestic businesses, as consumers and companies rallied behind homegrown brands. For many Canadian industries, this was more than just retaliation. It was an opportunity to strengthen their own economy. While the US was starting to feel the pressure, the real question was, how would the rest of the world respond? The global response. The trade war between the US and Canada wasn't just a North American issue. It was a global spectacle. Leaders and economists around the world watched closely as two of the world's largest trading partners clashed over tariffs. For many countries, Canada's defiance was inspiring. Smaller nations that had long felt bullied by US trade policies saw Canada's response as a blueprint for standing up to economic aggression. The European Union, China, and Japan quickly signaled support for Canada, with some even considering additional trade deals to strengthen Canada's position. The idea was simple. If Canada was being pushed away by the United States, other countries were eager to fill the gap. Meanwhile, global markets reacted with uncertainty. Investors feared that Trump's aggressive trade stance could trigger a larger economic slowdown, impacting not just North America, but worldwide financial stability. The potential for a ripple effect in industries ranging from manufacturing to tech to agriculture became a growing concern. For the United States, the isolation was becoming clear. The more Trump doubled down on his aggressive trade policies, the more the world moved away from the US as a trusted trade partner. With Canada standing firm and the world taking notice, the big question remained. How long could Trump afford to keep this fight going? The industry's at war. The economic ties between the United States and Canada run deep, with both nations relying on each other across multiple industries. However, with Trump's tariffs and Canada's retaliation, the once smooth flow of trade is now facing severe disruption. Key industries, auto manufacturing, agriculture, and raw materials, are already feeling the impact. But which side stands to lose more? The automotive sector, one of the largest economic engines for both countries, is among the hardest hit. Canada is the top supplier of auto parts to US manufacturers, and many American vehicles are assembled with a significant number of Canadian-made components. Tariffs on Canadian imports are already driving up the cost of production for Detroit's Big Three, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. Meanwhile, Canadian auto workers are facing uncertainty as demand for parts drops. If this trade war continues, car prices in the US could skyrocket, pushing consumers away and leading to potential layoffs. Meanwhile, agriculture is another industry caught in the crossfire. Canada is the largest buyer of US farm products, with American soybeans, corn, and beef making up a major portion of exports. But with tariffs in place, Canadian importers are shifting their supply chains toward Europe, Latin America, and even their own domestic producers. US farmers, who have already endured market instability in recent years, are facing mounting losses, while Canadian farmers see new opportunities to expand. In the energy and raw materials sector, Canada has the upper hand. The US depends heavily on Canadian crude oil, natural gas, and key minerals. If Canada diverts its energy exports toward Asia and Europe, the US could struggle to replace those supplies, leading to higher energy prices at home. The question is, will American policymakers recognize the economic risk before it is too late? With industries reeling on both sides of the border, Canada appears to have a stronger position. But why is it better equipped to handle this trade war than in the past? The Canadian advantage. Trade disputes between the US and Canada are nothing new, but this time, Canada is better prepared. Unlike previous economic battles, where Canada was more vulnerable, the country has diversified its trade relationships, secured new allies, and built a more resilient economy. One of the biggest advantages Canada now has is its stronger international trade agreements. In the past, Canada relied heavily on the North American Free Trade Agreement, making it particularly exposed to U.S. economic policies. However, in recent years, Canada has expanded its global partnerships through deals like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. These agreements give Canadian businesses access to massive markets, reducing their dependence on U.S. trade. Another key factor is Canada's growing role as an energy powerhouse. While the U.S. is imposing tariffs, Canada is strengthening its relationships with energy-hungry nations like Japan, South Korea, and Germany. With new infrastructure investments, including the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, Canada is positioning itself as a reliable energy supplier outside of North America. Moreover, Canada has taken steps to bolster domestic production and innovation. With the risk of losing U.S. suppliers, Canadian businesses have been investing in local manufacturing, particularly in the technology, clean energy, and pharmaceutical sectors. Government incentives have encouraged companies to reduce reliance on U.S. imports and build a more self-sufficient economy. The Canadian dollar also plays a role in this advantage. A weaker Canadian dollar compared to the US dollar makes Canadian exports cheaper and more competitive in global markets. While some businesses are affected by rising costs of imported US goods, Canadian exporters are gaining a competitive edge elsewhere. All of these factors mean that Canada is no longer just reacting to US economic policies. It is actively shaping its own future. This trade war is not just a setback, it is an opportunity. While Canada is leveraging its strengths, American businesses are facing mounting losses. How much financial damage is this trade war causing on U.S. soil? The U.S. retail nightmare. One of the most immediate and devastating consequences of this trade war is the impact on American retailers. The Canadian boycott of U.S. products is not just a symbolic gesture, it is a financial disaster for American businesses. Canada is the largest export market for U.S. consumer goods. American retailers have always relied on Canadian shoppers, who spend billions of dollars each year on products ranging from clothing and electronics to food and household goods. However, as tensions escalate, Canadian consumers are shifting their spending habits away from U.S. brands, and it is already causing major losses. Large U.S. retailers like Walmart, Costco, and Amazon are feeling the pressure as Canadian shoppers actively avoid American products. Some companies have already reported a steep decline in cross-border sales, with Canadians choosing local alternatives or turning to European and Asian brands instead. The ripple effect extends beyond major corporations. Small businesses across the U.S. are also suffering, particularly in border towns, where Canadian tourists were once a reliable customer base. As losses pile up, U.S. business leaders are growing frustrated. Many have called on Washington to reverse the tariffs, warning that prolonged tensions could lead to a permanent shift in consumer behavior. But will the pressure be enough to force a policy change? If Canada successfully weathers this crisis, could this trade war become the catalyst for permanent economic transformation? Will this crisis push Canada to economic independence? One area where Canada is accelerating its independence is in the technology and manufacturing sectors. Historically, Canadian businesses have depended on U.S. tech giants and supply chains. But as trade tensions rise, Canada is investing in homegrown innovation. Companies are developing new partnerships with European and Asian tech firms, reducing reliance on U.S. imports. Agriculture is also undergoing a transformation. With Canadian farmers shifting away from U.S. suppliers, the government is expanding programs that support domestic food production and international agricultural trade. This is creating new opportunities for Canadian producers, while simultaneously reducing their dependence on American markets. Perhaps the most significant long-term shift is in Canada's energy strategy. For years, Canada has been the primary supplier of oil and gas to the U.S. But with rising tensions, it is strengthening partnerships with Asia and Europe. If these relationships continue to grow, Canada could permanently reshape its energy trade, leaving the U.S. with fewer options. Ultimately, this crisis is forcing Canada to redefine its economic future. While short-term pain is inevitable, the long-term outlook suggests that Canada is on the path toward greater economic independence. As Canada adapts to a new reality, the big question remains: will the U.S. recognize the economic risk before it is too late? Trudeau's rise. how Trump is making him stronger. With declining approval ratings and a growing wave of dissatisfaction over domestic policies, Justin Trudeau's leadership was at risk. Then came Trump's tariffs. What should have been a crisis for Canada turned into an opportunity for Trudeau to redefine his leadership and rally the nation. Trump's aggressive stance, aimed at pressuring Canada into economic submission, inadvertently gave Trudeau exactly what he needed: a clear enemy and a unifying national cause. By standing firm against the tariffs, Trudeau positioned himself as the defender of Canadian sovereignty, a leader willing to fight back against American economic intimidation. His response was not just about policy, it was about national identity. Canadians, historically pragmatic when it comes to U.S. relations, were suddenly swept into a wave of patriotic defiance. Trudeau capitalized on this moment, delivering strong speeches, rallying business leaders, and forging alliances with opposition politicians who, under normal circumstances, would have challenged him. Even critics of his administration found themselves aligning with Trudeau against Trump. Transitioning to the broader impact, how has this tariff war affected politics within the U.S.? While Trudeau has strengthened his position, Trump's aggressive tactics have exposed deep fractures within his own party. The Republican Civil War. Trump's trade war with Canada was supposed to be a show of strength, a demonstration that he could bring America's trading partners to their knees. Instead, it has divided the Republican Party like never before. While Trump's most loyal base continues to support him, a growing number of Republican lawmakers, governors, and business leaders are breaking ranks. The problem: economics. The tariffs are directly harming U.S. businesses, particularly in states that rely heavily on trade with Canada. Farmers, manufacturers, and retailers, many of whom traditionally support Republicans, are feeling the financial squeeze. State governors from border states like Michigan, New York, and North Dakota have openly criticized Trump's policies, warning that economic retaliation from Canada will cripple their economies. At the federal level, Republican senators and House members from trade-dependent states are being forced to make a choice: stand with Trump and risk alienating their constituents, or defy him and risk their political careers. This internal struggle has led to public clashes between pro-Trump Republicans and more traditional conservatives who see the tariffs as a reckless economic gamble. Behind closed doors, GOP donors, many of whom run businesses affected by trade, are expressing frustration. The Chamber of Commerce, a historically Republican-aligned business group, has openly opposed Trump's tariffs, urging lawmakers to push back. Even influential conservative media voices are questioning whether this trade war is worth the political and economic damage. As this unfolds, the biggest question remains: even if Trump changes course, will Canada ever fully trust the U.S. again? The long-term damage: will U.S.-Canada relations ever recover? For over 150 years, the United States and Canada have enjoyed one of the strongest economic and political partnerships in the world. Even during past disputes, whether over softwood lumber, dairy exports, or trade agreements, diplomacy always prevailed. But this time, the damage might be permanent. Trudeau's government has already begun shifting economic strategies, strengthening partnerships with Europe, China, and other international markets. If Canada successfully builds new long-term trade agreements, the U.S. will no longer be its primary trading partner. This shift won't happen overnight, but the foundations are already being laid. Public perception is another factor. Among Canadians, trust in the United States is at an all-time low. The widespread boycott of U.S. goods and travel reflects a deeper resentment, one that could take years to fade. If Canadian businesses and consumers make permanent changes to their buying habits, the U.S. could see a significant long-term decline in exports to Canada. Diplomatically, the rift between Ottawa and Washington will likely extend beyond Trump's presidency. Even if a future U.S. leader reverses the tariffs, Canada will still be wary of relying too heavily on the U.S. economy. The message is clear: Canada has learned its lesson, and it is moving toward greater economic independence. As this chapter of U.S.-Canada relations reaches a turning point, it raises the ultimate question: is America losing its most important ally, not because of war or diplomacy, but because of Trump's economic blunders? The new energy power players. Who's taking over? China and India, the two largest energy consumers in the world, are aggressively securing new energy sources. China, which has already been investing heavily in Canadian energy projects, is fast-tracking deals with Canadian producers to secure long-term supply. India, facing a severe energy crunch, is also looking to Canada, Australia, and Middle Eastern nations to meet its growing demand. At the same time, Russia is expanding its energy influence by strengthening ties with Asian markets, especially after losing its European buyers. The Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, is increasing energy production to take advantage of rising global demand. But while these nations are stepping up, they cannot match Canada's stability and regulatory transparency, something that has always made Canada a preferred trading partner. As these new power players attempt to take over, one major question looms: can they truly replace Canada's reliability, or will the energy market become more unpredictable and unstable? The U.S. oil industry's last stand, a failing gamble. With Canada reducing its exports to the United States, Washington is making a desperate bet, doubling down on domestic oil production. The Trump administration, despite its push for renewables, is under pressure to increase domestic drilling. But there's a massive flaw in this plan. The U.S. does not have the same oil reserves or refining capacity as Canada. The shale boom that once made the United States an energy powerhouse is slowing down, with declining productivity in major oil fields. Additionally, domestic refining infrastructure is aging and heavily dependent on Canadian crude, which is specially suited for U.S. refineries. Even if the U.S. ramps up production, logistical and economic barriers remain. Building new refineries takes years, and the political divide over environmental regulations makes it nearly impossible for the U.S. to rapidly scale up production. In the meantime, gas prices could surge, and American consumers will bear the brunt of this energy realignment. If Washington fails to secure alternative energy imports, the U.S. could face an energy crisis of its own making. This is no longer just a trade dispute. It is a reckless gamble with long-term consequences. As the U.S. struggles to maintain its energy supply, the rest of the world is shifting towards a different strategy, one that prioritizes national energy security over global trade. The rise of energy nationalism. A global crisis unfolds. The world is entering a new era of energy nationalism. Countries are no longer just trading energy. They are hoarding it, weaponizing it, and using it as a geopolitical tool. Canada's move away from the United States is part of a larger global trend, where nations are prioritizing their own energy security over international cooperation. China has already tightened its grip on critical minerals and rare earth elements, making it harder for Western countries to develop batteries and green energy technologies. Russia has used natural gas as a political weapon against Europe, while Saudi Arabia and OPEC have shown their ability to manipulate global oil prices to their advantage. Even Canada, historically one of the most open and cooperative energy suppliers, is now shifting towards strategic partnerships with Asian markets instead of relying solely on the U.S. This is a huge warning sign that the world is deglobalizing energy trade. If this trend continues, the energy market could become fragmented and unpredictable. Instead of a smooth global supply chain, countries may impose export bans, new tariffs, and political restrictions, leading to severe price volatility and potential shortages. The energy war is no longer just about who sells the most oil. It is about who controls the future of energy itself. And that brings us to the final question. Who will emerge as the true energy superpower of the future? Energy superpowers of the future. Who will lead? The world's energy landscape is no longer dominated by oil alone. While fossil fuels still play a major role, the race for clean energy dominance is now just as important. Nations that lead in renewables, nuclear energy, and battery storage technology will shape the next century of energy politics. China has already taken the lead in solar panel production and battery technology, controlling more than 80% of the world's supply chains for critical energy materials. Europe, despite its energy struggles, is pushing aggressively into wind and hydrogen power to reduce dependence on foreign oil and gas. Canada, thanks to its vast natural resources, hydroelectric power, and growing nuclear investments, has the potential to become a top-tier energy superpower, but only if it fully embraces the transition. The United States, on the other hand, is at a crossroads. While the country still has massive oil and gas reserves, it is falling behind in energy innovation. Political gridlock, outdated infrastructure, and short-term policies have made it difficult for the U.S. to compete in the new energy economy. If Washington continues to focus only on fossil fuels, it risks being left behind in the next era of energy dominance. The global energy game is changing, and the question is, will the U.S. adapt, or will it lose its place as an energy leader? Let us know your thoughts in the comment below.